Hello, I'm Marites Vitug, and this is Worldview. We take a look at global, regional, and national affairs in conversations with officials, newsmakers, and analysts. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is the Philippines Ambassador to the US, Jose Manuel or Babe Romualdez. We will be talking about the upcoming U.S. elections and how Ambassador Romualdez navigated relations between the Philippines and the U.S. under two different presidents, Donald Trump and now Joe Biden. Welcome to the show, Ambassador. Thank you so much for making time for this interview.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Marites. Good to see you.
First, sir, you've been our ambassador to the U.S. for 7 years now under then Donald Trump and now Biden. Let's start with the Trump's presidency. Did the Trump administration actively engage with the Philippines then? And did you have to lobby hard for more attention, for them to pay attention to Manila?
Well, actually, Manila, there was a lot of attention coming from Washington to Manila with President Duterte. Luckily for me, President Trump went to the Philippines shortly before I took up my post here in Washington, D.C. That was in November of 2017 when we had the, I think the ASEAN summit there where President Trump came to Manila and I had a chance to meet him. So that kind of sort of like broke the ice, and he actually liked President Duterte. At least that's what he told me when I presented my credentials to him.
Okay, sir. So at the time, here also in the Philippines, Duterte had no love lost for America. So for you, what were the challenges you had to hurdle in keeping the relations going?
Well, I think the big challenge really was mostly what President Duterte was saying on many occasions about how he felt about the United States and the sovereignty of the Philippines, which was very important for him or for the country. And he actually, at some point, even threatened to break relations with the United States. If you remember, he mentioned that when he went to Beijing, right there and then. So that was worrisome, to say the least. But nonetheless, I took that as really just a message to the United States that sovereignty was very important for President Duterte, and that it was important that we had to have some kind of a mutual respect for each other. That's just the message that I kept on giving them here. But the big challenge, quite honestly, was the fact that many in the U.S. Congress, particularly the Democrats, were very much concerned with the human rights violations taking place in the Philippines. That, I think, was where the challenge was on most occasions.
So did you have to raise that often, let's say, with the Office of the President or with the Department of Foreign Affairs at the time, with Secretary Locsin?
Well, I think what we had to do was mostly to explain, specifically, I think, at that time, the U.S. Congress, particularly Senator Durbin, who was the chairman of the Justice Committee of the U.S. Congress, he was very much concerned about the case of Laila de Lima and, of course, Maria Ressa of Rappler. These are the two personalities that they kept mentioning to me on why these cases were not being resolved quickly. And I explained, of course, that we had our own justice system and that we had to just wait for our justice system to work. But, of course, they were pushing very hard on those bases. So we communicated that to then Secretary Menardo Guevara and also, of course, to the Office of the President through Secretary Locsin.
Sir, when Duterte threatened to terminate EDCA, or the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the U.S., how did you make the case with the Philippines or with the Office of the President to continue EDCA? Because I remember, I think you had to work hard to make the Philippines or make the President understand that we needed EDCA.
Well, actually, it's more the VFA, which is the president was at that time ready to abrogate the agreement that we had with the United States on the visiting forces agreement. That was very important for the defense establishment here in Washington, D.C. So on many occasions, I tried to explain that first, of course, to then our Secretary of Defense. I also explained that to Secretary Medaldea from the Office of the President, that the VFA was really something that was it was important for us to be able to look and navigate through all of that. So I also consulted then former Senate President Juan Ponce Enrile, whom I knew personally. So I called him up and I asked his advice and I asked him on how we can navigate this through and let the president understand on how important it is for the relationship. In fairness to Senate President Enrile, he said that we have nothing to gain or lose with the VFA. In other words, to him, he said the VFA could possibly be helpful in some ways to our soldiers because of the training exercises that we're going to have. But there was nothing really to gain out of it except the fact that there was this agreement that we had with the United States. So I communicated that to the Office of the President. But the breaking point was really, quite honestly, is when the pandemic took place. And I think that, as you know, I've always said this on many occasions, that there is no such thing as a free lunch. And so because of the question of the VFA and how it was going, I think it was made clear to me that the priority that we would be, the Philippines would be getting in terms of the supplies that will be given out to the Philippines will have to be depending on the relationships. Obviously, their topmost allies would get the vaccines first, at least with the kind of help. But this was already during the time of President Biden, by the way. So, because of the many reports that we've had that a lot of people were dying in our country, the vaccines that were being distributed from China was 50% the effectivity. That's quite clear. That was what was being reported, and that the report that the vaccines, the mRNA technology was much more effective. So I pleaded with the president at that time, and I said that, Mr. President, I think we have nothing to lose. I think if we can make sure that we continue with the DFA, we will be at least be given a priority in terms of the supply for the vaccines as soon as they're ready. In fact, if you recall, there was a 10 million Pfizer allocation that was being given to us. Not really being given, but allocation that we would be able to purchase this. But for some reason, we didn't sign the NDA, which is non-disclosure agreement, which is very important. And that whole thing, that whole deal went to Singapore. So there was a lot of disappointment then, of course. But I think in the end, President Duterte saw the value of having a fairly good relationship with the United States in terms of our military alliance. So he agreed to continue with the VFA.
In exchange for the vaccines.
Well, I wouldn't want to call it. Of course, the United States kept on saying that we're not going to do this in terms of vaccines, but you could see it going that way because in Myanmar, as you know, with what happened to Myanmar, they were not given priority. Although the United States eventually sent donations of vaccines to Myanmar, in spite of the fact that there was a military regime there. But they were not given the priority. And I wanted us, the Philippines, to get the priority.
Sir, looking back, was there any upside in the US Philippine relations during Duterte's presidency? Because some say that the US during that time gave more importance to the Philippines, and it was at the time when State Secretary Pompeo publicly assured the Philippines that the MDT, or the Mutual Defense Treaty, included attacks on public vessels in the South China Sea, sir. So parang they gave us more, they treated us as an equal partner at the time?
Yes, well, actually, as I've said this on many occasions, in fairness to President Duterte, he made the message very clear. that we have to be treated equally, that we were a sovereign nation, and that they should not take us for granted. And so the Mutual Defense Treaty, which is the basic alliance that we have with the United States, had to be revisited on many occasions. And that is when the ironclad, with the word ironclad was used extensively. First, the message was given by then Secretary Pompeo, who went to Manila specifically to give that message to President Duterte, and then on many occasions, the other government officials, especially the Pentagon, continued to assure the Philippines that the Mutual Defense Treaty would be honored by the United States.
Sir, now let's turn to the exciting U.S. race. It's a very tight race, as we talked about earlier. How would a Trump or a Harris presidency impact bilateral relations between Manila and Washington, D.C.? Sir, let's start with Trump first. How would it impact our bilateral relations?
Well, the lucky thing is that I was here in 2017 during the Trump presidency, and I had the opportunity to meet many of those that were around President Trump, specifically people at the White House. Many of them, as a matter of fact, are going to be playing or are playing a role right now in the Trump candidacy. One of them is Ambassador Robert O'Brien, who's a very close advisor of President Trump. He's from California, and he was the last national security advisor of President Trump. And I've had lunch with him, and some of the people also that were with him, like Alison Hooker and some others, told me that if in the event that President Trump goes back to the White House, their policy, the foreign policy, specifically in the Indo-Pacific region, will remain the same. Basically, they even told me that the policy that was in place during Trump's administration was actually even being followed by the Biden administration. And so it is just a question of just it being continued again during the time of President Trump, if he does go back to the White House.
How about a Harris presidency? Do you see this as a continuation of Biden's foreign policy here in the Indo-Pacific?
I would believe so. I think the security advisors of Vice President Harris have the same kind of line of thought as far as dealing with the Indo-Pacific region, especially in the ASEAN region, and how important it is for the United States that there is the ASEAN centrality and that there is a pushback on any potential aggressive behavior coming from China specifically. Of course, there is what they call the competition between these two powers that we're right in the middle of all of that. I think that the policy that will be taken by the Harris administration, if she does become the next president of the United States, will most likely even become even stronger than what we have today.
There's been a lot of reporting on Trump describing him as averse to multilaterals or to alliances. So how about if he wins, will he continue? Do you see him continuing the trilaterals, cooperation between US, Japan, and the Philippines, or even Japan, South Korea, and the US?
I would believe that President Trump, being first and foremost, he is a businessman, as we all know that. And so I think he would see the economic benefits of having these alliances, especially with Japan. And the alliance that we've had, the trilateral alliance or the trilateral agreement that we had with Japan, which was done early this year by President Marcos and Prime Minister Yoshida with President Biden, has an economic component in that agreement. And that one, I think, is going to be something that President Trump would most likely see as a benefit for the United States. So again, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Everybody will have to have something out of whatever agreements that are signed. And I think the trilateral agreement we have with Japan is going to be mutually beneficial for all three, between Japan, the Philippines, and the United States.
In the case of Vice President Harris, she's been to the Philippines as well. She's met with President Marcos 5 times. She's been to ASEAN summit. So do you think she has better appreciation of the situation here in South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific? Better than Trump, I mean.
Well, I would think so, because if you remember, when the Vice President went to the Philippines, she not only went to Manila and to have a meeting with President Marcos, but she also went to Palau, where she actually went to a fishing village in Palawan to really see and firsthand what the situation was. And the fishing village, the fishermen were actually telling her that they were suffering, and their livelihood was in peril because of the fact that they could no longer go far away, where there were more fishes, obviously. So this was a major concern. In other words, there was an emotional component to this whole thing. And when we had a conversation with Vice President Harris, she mentioned that a couple of times to us, that she was really so sorry to see our fishermen really their livelihood being curtailed by what the Chinese were doing.
Sir, the Politico there, the news website in the U.S. reported that President Marcos and Vice President Harris have close personal connection. Is that accurate? Have you seen that for yourself, sir?
As you said, they've met 5 times. I think that when Vice President Harris came to Manila, she immediately saw that President Marcos had a right vision on how he wanted to see the relationship with the United States would flourish. And it was very clear from the way President Marcos was describing the relationship that it was something that was going to evolve because it was mutually beneficial for both of us, meaning the Philippines and the United States, to have a stronger relationship because of the challenges that we were facing. And I could sense then that the Vice President was quite pleased to hear that, because that's exactly what she went to Manila for in the first place. And so when President Marcos was invited by President Biden to come to Washington on an official visit, the Vice President was very insistent. In fact, her advisors or her staff were always calling the embassy, asking what would be an opportunity for the Vice President. She wanted to invite him first for a meeting, but then we eventually agreed to have a breakfast meeting, or not. It was a meeting, but at the same time, it was also a social event at the Vice President's house here in Washington, D.C. And the President was very pleased to go and attend that breakfast with the Vice President then. So they hit it off well, in the sense that they had very good, deep dive conversation on how we wanted to bring our relationship with the United States and how it would be beneficial for both of us in bringing about a stronger relationship that would be beneficial, again, to both our countries.
Sir, let's talk about the quadrilaterals, like the newly formed Quad, defense ministers of Australia, Philippines, Japan, and the U.S. Do you see this continuing under Trump? Even the quadrilateral exercises in the West Philippine Sea, which have been happening here in the past few months, do you see this as an activity that will be looked upon positively by a Trump presidency?
I would think so, mainly because all of the national security people that will be with the president, with the former President Trump, will most likely play a role in terms of what the strategic objectives are of the Trump administration would be in the Indo-Pacific region. And obviously having these quadrilateral agreements, especially with Australia and South Korea and Japan and the Philippines for that matter, is going to be very helpful for the for the security of the United States. Again, it all boils down to what is good for the United States, and what is good for us and what's good for the other countries is what makes this thing work at this time. And ironically, it's really like what's happening in Europe right now. What Russia is doing to Ukraine is consolidating the NATO, making it even stronger and having more members coming in. This is probably going to be the same thing that will happen to the Indo-Pacific region, which is slowly but surely happening in that sense, because you have the behavior that's taking place right now coming from China.
Sir, for the last few questions, I would like to get your insights on the presidential race. We were talking earlier about the upcoming debate between Harris and Trump. Do you think this is going to be decisive this is the last 60 days or so of the election campaign?
Well, no question about it, because everybody is very eager to find out. Everyone will compare this obviously to what happened in the debate between President Biden and former President Trump, and how that was a disaster, so to speak, for the Democratic Party. And so everyone will be looking at how Vice President Harris will be able to have this debate or conversation with President Trump. I don't know if you're aware, but I think one of those that the Democratic Party is now pushing for is that the microphone will not be muted, which is, I think, a strategy that the Democrats are now using as a way to be able to really make to see that President Trump will not be able to help himself, but to continue to intrude into and saying things. So, and then which I think is partly a whole strategy for the Democrats to show that President Trump will be saying things that perhaps, as they say, that are not true and whatever it is. These are what we are seeing, and some of the analysts here in Washington are saying. And that's why, as I told you earlier, this debate is really going to be I wouldn't say the breaking point, but it will be the point of where people will see which one and who will be able to come out with the issues and the policies that are important for the Americans. At the same time, see the personalities of these both and how strong they are. Everybody knows President Trump already, but they want to see how Vice President Harris will perform in this debate.
Sir, does foreign policy play a role in the U.S. election? I mean, do voters, are they concerned about foreign policy, or it's not really a top 10 issue, a top 5 issue?
It's always been an issue. I think for many Americans, how the United States takes seriously the role that it plays all over the world, and we all know. I mean, the entire world is actually watching this election, because whatever happens in this election and whoever becomes president is going to affect the entire world. There's no question about it. And so that is the reason why I think that the Americans also see that as important in terms of who the president will be and what their policy will be, because they know that the security of the United States, or the global security, will affect a major power like the United States, like what's happening right now in Europe, and what could possibly happen in the Indo-Pacific region. So I think it may not be a top issue right now. Domestic policies, of course, are now taking center stage because of the so-called inflation and the economy. These are the main issues that affect a lot of Americans here in the United States, but foreign policy is still an issue that is a point of discussion, and I'm sure that will be part of the debate on September 10th.
Sir, my last question is this. We in the Philippines were watching the U.S. election closely because men are saying that this will also mean that if Trump wins, then, and he said he would be a dictator, then it would be bad for democracy. And since the U.S. is the beacon of democracy and we're part of that, of the countries that are democratic, it may affect the Philippines as well. What's your view on this?
And first of all, I don't think that kind of potential dictatorship can happen here in the United States. This is a very established country. I think the democratic system in this country is very much in place, and so that kind of conversation may be pushed around or maybe thrown around a little bit. President Trump has always believed in having a strong rule, and I think that's the reason why he got along well with, at least that's what he said, that he got along well with President Duterte because he was a strong leader. And so he sees strong leaders as those that can make policies and stick to it. And like, for instance, the policy on the border control here in the United States is a major issue. And President Trump, I think, was able to show to many Americans that he's very strong about controlling the border by building the whole wall. But a dictatorship, I don't think that can ever happen. Not here in the United States. Not with the kind of democratic system that's already in place here. That's been around for 250 years.
Sir, on that note, thank you very much for making time for this interview. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Marites.
Yes, we hope to talk to you again, especially after the elections in November.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you very much. We'll see you again.
Okay, to our viewers, thank you very much for watching us. This has been Worldview with Marites Vitug. Till next time.